Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon and welcome. Welcome, first of all, to President Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin for the National Day of the Russian Federation. Thanks for being here with us, and thanks to the whole Russian delegation and the people in charge of the pavilion that we have visited this morning. It is a very nice pavilion. A pavilion that in the first month had about 500,000 visitors, and in this pavilion we can actually check and see not only the great agro-food and research tradition, which is typical of the Russian experience, but also the cultural, historical and future collaborations for our countries. So we are talking about a presence inside an event which Italy strongly believes in. Some Italian press operators know that Expo Milano was accompanied by several negative comments, but today it is a great reality with world relevance, and the presence of the Russian Federation, of its president, of the Minister of Foreign Affairs, and all the ministers who are here with us testified this. This is a great occasion to reflect on food security, on nutrition, on sustainability, on a healthy, enough, sustainable nutrition. And for this path, the Italian government has arranged the Charter of Milan, wanted by Minister Martina, which is a sort of a legacy for the Expo. The legacy that actually takes up all the hints for reflections on food and life. We have to tackle this issue as a key issue, and we discussed about that also during our visit in the Russian pavilion, also considering the differences between the different regions. In our opinions, they are not to be considered second-level themes. These are strategic issues, actually. Of course, during the speeches and the negotiations, the meetings we had with the delegation and with President Putin, and this is the fourth meeting we have since when I became a prime minister. President Putin, of course, worked with so many prime ministers, but in this my year as prime minister in Italy, we met 4 times, and we actually mutually updated as regards the international reports. Of course, the Ukraine situation, and as everybody knows, there are worries and hopes, and of course also elements for separation in this situation. We shared and have in common the fundamental principle that is the Minsk II agreement is literally the reference point of all our commitments, and I believe that all men and women of goodwill should work for Minsk II protocol to be fully applied and for it to overcome the crisis which is currently in Ukraine. But we didn't discuss about this only. We also tackled the very complicated issue of the Mediterranean, particularly the Libya issue, and we discussed about that also in Moscow at the Kremlin at the beginning of March. The threat of international terrorism, the threat that the whole world is currently to tackle, and that sees together on the same side facing this risk from the Mediterranean to Afghanistan, and not only passing through the Middle East, but also the hottest parts of our planet. And I believe that sharing worries and also the will to find solutions together, well, that is a priority in all our meetings and in our exchanges. I confirmed to President Putin the need to consider as a priority the situation in the Mediterranean too, considering the Libyan crisis, because this is not only a social and a humanitarian emergency. This is also a situation to fight terrorism and the connected risks. In the end, I will meet back President Putin next November in Turkey, with the G20, where we will have the occasion to discuss particularly the topics on the global economic agenda that sees a moment of great changes, of great difficulties somehow. Italy is living behind a moment of strong difficulties. Also, the first data as regards the new hirings that were published today by INPS confirm that a recovery has started, and this is very important in our opinion, but we still have a long way to go. So the G20 partnership could represent a good soil for conversation and confrontation together with the president of the Russian Federation and his collaborators, and I want to thank them, welcoming them not only in Milan, the city where we actually met a few months ago as well, but also in Rome, where within the next few hours Mr. Putin will meet the new president of the Italian Republic, Sergio Mattarella, and of course His Holiness Pope Francis, living in the Italian state, going to the Vatican City, but of course always remaining in Rome. Welcome, Mr. President Putin. The floor to you now. Dear Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, first of all, I would like to thank our friends for the invitation, for the wonderful organization and the functioning of Expo 2015. Today we visited together the Italian and the Russian pavilions here at Expo 2015. Both pavilions demonstrate that we have so many possibilities for cooperation in the field of the environment, of resources, to guarantee food for all the inhabitants on our planet. We have finished our negotiations. We have greatly discussed in bilateral occasions, and as Renzi said, we have already talked on a number of international current topics. Italy is a great international partner for Russia in Europe, ranking third as regards the volume of trade, but quite lately, due to well-known reasons, this exchange was reduced by 10%, and in the last quarter by 25%. Of course, the situation is not satisfactory to us. It's not satisfactory for the business community and the governments of both countries. We know that Italian entrepreneurs do not want to stop mutually positive agreements with Russia, and Italian entrepreneurs show their interest towards our pavilion. The Italian business will be largely represented at the St. Petersburg Forum from the 18th to the 20th of July, within which we will have a Russian-Italian seminar to strengthen the commercial relationships in the current market conditions. In our country, there are about 400 companies operating there. 7 banks are represented there, and as for investments, 1 billion. In Italy, our investments reach 2.3 billion euro. And then the localization of Italian productions as well. From the purchase of Italian goods, we started to producing things done with Italy. Some pharmaceutical projects and also in the automotive sector. Finmeccanica, for instance, together with the Sukhoi Consortium, designed the Superjet 100 Rosneft with the Italians, and they are working on the production of Italian helicopters. I also talked several times with the Prime Minister. He is very happy to attract Italian companies there up to 2025. Italy ranks second as for the volume of gas in Europe. These data date back to 2014, 21.6 billion cubic meters. Italian companies participate in the requalification and reconstruction of power plants. Enel invested strongly and is strongly working there. Rosneft and Eni do intend to valorize the sea, the Barents Sea platform. Norcoren is and other Italian companies are working on very promising technologies and also aeolic technologies, wind technologies in both our countries. And we also keep up with some humanitarian connections, the interest towards the history, culture and traditions and costumes of both. Talking with the Italian Prime Minister, some elements of the Italian culture are well understood by the Russians and are considered as our own elements. Italy receives about 1 million tourists every year, accounting for, and Russia is visited by 20,000 Italian visitors. The Forum of Civil Societies will also represent this, and we will have a session of the forum in St. Petersburg within short, so we will discuss about many international challenges, the Middle East, Northern Africa, Libya first. But what can I say? It's obvious that whatever happens in Libya, it's the consequence of the social and economic catastrophe of extremist groups. What's happening in front of our eyes is really the collapse of the Libyan state, Libyan state. The consequences of the intervention back in 2011. Russia wants to solve this crisis in peace. We are working with the regional and international colleagues, also inside the UN Council for Safety. The situation in Libya definitely is very tough. There is ISIS there. The Prime Minister already talked about that. We have devoted so much attention to the Ukraine crisis. We all know there was no other solution. Only peace could be acceptable, and Italy also supported that. For the Minsk agreements to be fully implemented, in the protocol actually includes all the aspects of political, socio-political, humanitarian, military aspects of the agreement, but they are not all fully implemented. Our goal together, our work together is going on with the delegation, with the participation of ministers and with several people, entrepreneurs and representatives from the business community. As we have said, I will meet Sergio Mattarella, the Italian President of the Republic, and I will also meet Pope Francis. I again want to thank the Italian Prime Minister for his invitation to Expo 2015 and our joint participation in the opening of the official day and for our important talk. Thank you. Thanks, Mr. President. I think we have a couple of questions. First question. Well, yes, Andrea Bonini, Sky TG24 for President Putin. I wanted to understand whether you also talked about sanctions. What do you expect from Italy, from Europe, and if tighter sanctions could also tighten the relationship with countries with which you are having better relationships? And for President Renzi, what could be a way to summarize this whole situation? Well, we talked about sanctions, but actually with our feet on earth, not talking about repealing sanctions and reducing sanctions. We talked about how these sanctions do prevent us from working. We have done some projects on together in the infrastructure world, for instance, sector, for instance, and it's obvious that Italian enterprises that won the tenders are interested in completing these projects, but now they are blocked. Because with these sanctions on, they cannot be realized, so we must find the way out, either repealing the sanctions or other tools, of course, and we must do that to support these companies. We will find partners, I'm sure of that, but I don't think we should waive what we have already approved and the contracts that have already been assigned. And the same is also true for our cooperation in the military field and the technical field. This cooperation is not very much theoretical for the defense of Russia, but the waiver to already stipulated contracts and so on brought also to this waiver brought to Italian companies that could not gain €1 billion. They could create new jobs, but this did not happen right because of the sanctions. Of course, it's quite clear we are currently implementing the program to replace imports, and this is possibly a drive for our industry in the field of high technologies. But actually, in general, this damages our own interaction. And one day or another, of course, we will overcome these limitations. Well, in Europe, there is a discussion on, as usually a quite clear, neat discussion within the countries that make up the 28. Of course, there are different ideas on how we came to this situation and on how we should leave it behind, but there is also a shared leitmotif. And actually, I dare say in this moment, we are all sharing the same position. Definitely, Italy is sharing it, and the main international community countries are sharing it. And as what we could hear from President Putin today, the Russian Federation is sharing it. That is, the real question today is the Minsk II agreements. The Minsk II agreements, if respected, and President Putin and I underline fully respected, the whole of them respected, well, they are the reference points for everything. So, when the Minsk agreement is then implemented, the tensions, difficulties, worries, and sanctions at commercial level will be left behind. They are connected with the Minsk Protocol. However, and I want to close on that, around the Minsk Protocol, there is not so much the need to close the Ukraine question with all its consequences also connected to the internal organization of Ukraine, and the Minsk Protocol talks a lot about that. On several occasions, we even offered an Italian model, that is the Alto Adige model, to guarantee autonomy or decentralization on the territory inside Ukraine. But the Minsk Protocol is very clear on that. conflict. So the reference point is the Minsk Protocol. What is highlighted is that if we could really conclude the Minsk Protocol pathway, this would strengthen a collaboration which is already on at international level and which is quite important in several more parts of the world. In the agreement with Iran and the agreement required to be stipulated in Syria and the transition period of Iraq, but also in Egypt and in many other North African countries, and the complicated Libyan situation, both in the UN, but not only there. And the role of the Russian Federation is very important. It is key. It is considered key by everybody, by all the European, Western countries. So I really hope, and Italy is working for the Minsk Protocol of course, the Minsk II Protocol, to be the reference point for this delicate season we are experiencing. One more question? Yes, the Russian side maybe? Good afternoon. Dmitry Smirnov, Pravda, Damoska. A question for both. How do you assess the perspectives in the Russian relationships with the G7? And up to what point can that compare with G20? Mr. Renzi mentioned the problem of Libya, of the refugees. Can we know whether you have discussed this in the detail? Well, as regards our relationship with the G7, we have no relationship with the G7. When we worked under that format, we participated in the discussions and the drawing up of the documents that were binding, that were not binding, but there was a meaning in all that. We had represented an alternative point of view, but our partners decided that they did not need this alternative point of view. They decided it's a club for interests, and we hope they can be successful in all their contacts and discussions. And I think that, however, it could be useful to develop international relationships and other formats like the G20. We are actively working within the BRICS organizations, India, Russia, China, Southern Africa, and one more format, the Shanghai Development Organization, that will be joined by additional members, India and Pakistan. We are actively working on several sides, also within the UN. If our partners want us on a bilateral base, then we can develop our relationships under different formats. Well, there are several occasions for confrontation, dialogue, and discussion. I believe that it is objectively true if we say that we need that in such a complicated international scenario compared to the past, Russia is in the first row with Europe, with the United States of America, with all the men and women of goodwill to tackle global threats that we are all experiencing. These threats regard us all. I referred to international terrorism before because if it is true that the international terrorism threat in Boko Haram, Africa, Nigeria, they have a different signature, ISIS or Al-Qaeda or the Taliban. Anyway, the leitmotif is a wave of extremism and of fanatism, integralism, with religious fanatism as well, that bring to innocent people being killed. people who are not defended. In front of this situation, we need the bigger powers worldwide, and the Russian Federation has been, is, and will be like that in the future. They might find a way to collaborate. This has happened, this has already happened, this is happening, and this will happen. The format we use to meet is, well, from this point of view, it depends on a number of circumstances and events like those that you all know. My hope is that by accepting and in the end fully complying with the Minsk II agreements, we can eliminate from the table the only element for divergence on the international panorama. If you refer to all the other reports, of course, that can be different assessments, different interests, national interests that are different, but there is a strong convergence. It's a shared work by all the operators and by the main countries. So the conclusion of my answer to your question, definitely we will go on working. The next meeting will be with the G20, mostly based on economic questions in Turkey. Again, there we will have a very important moment, particularly considering the situation we are experiencing at economic level, because we need more growth, at least in our country. And then we will have all those occasions for confrontation and dialogue, starting from a starting point, which is the Russian Federation is a permanent member at the Council for Safety in the United Nations, and as such we do confront and talk mutually. We have also discussed about a couple of resolutions by the UN on safety, and definitely we will have to discuss with Minister Lavrov. We joked with him when we met, saying that we do not only need his help and the Russian help on the Libyan, otherwise if he doesn't help if he doesn't help us, we will not have him for lunch with us within short. But since we are going to have lunch with him too within short, we will discuss during lunch on our mutual commitments on the UN resolutions and on all the formats in where we share our collaboration. This is a good occasion to close this press conference, thanking again President Putin and underlining, and I want to say that even though it's going to be difficult, I want to underline the ideal value and the contents of the Expo. Sorry if I get back to our original point, but if you visit the Russian pavilion, you will not only see whatever Russia is doing from the agro-food sector, but also innovation, research. President Putin was telling me how some excellent centers in the sector of agro-food and of innovation were open in St. Petersburg, even during the invasion, if I understood right, even when there was the toughest conflict with Nazism. Those scientists actually waived eating because they wanted to go on innovating. This is not our case because we never announced to our food, but I think this is a good message underlining the importance of the Expo contents. I know in writing your articles you will be interested in something more, but we would really be thankful if you could just devote a few lines to the concepts of this great event that you made even more precious with your president, Mr. President. And now let's see, if you don't mind, if the Italian agro-food preparations will be at the height of the expectations of the Russians. I won't talk about football anymore because otherwise there's diplomatic crisis on. Thank you, because we all want to win. Thank you.